are seeing great cultural references to national security topics across the board that go as far back as, my childhood with GI Joe cartoons. I mean, you had an infusion of national security into culture across the board. And as we see some of these threat landscapes change or become more critical for the general public to know about, how are we having these conversations? And one thing we have found is that it can't be through government reporting or through government testimony on the Hill. That won't cut it. And so I'll just start thanking Rodney and Candice for joining us. These are going to be kind of a fun conversation, I hope, for you as well. But just to tee up from a past experience, we had the Counter UAS Authority that was very challenging to get across on the Hill and for other constituencies, where DHS needed the ability to be able to mitigate threats from commercial small type drones. And it was a hard subject area. They're like, how is this such a threat? How is this such a challenge? And as a part of this process, we kept having continual meetings on this. There was a movie trailer that came out. So Angel Has Fallen came out and depicts our favorite movie president, Morgan Freeman, getting attacked by a swarm of drones while fishing. And this movie trailer did more advocacy than I could at any time. And so it was one of those points in time where we're like, okay, we need to make sure that we're bringing sort of that cultural understanding along with us, so that when we start talking about AI, people can ask us, do you mean the Terminator movies? I mean, there's this great hooks that exist with a lot of our concepts that we're trying to get across from a mitigation and innovation standpoint today. So one of the things we wanted to do when we were talking to Suzanne is kind of, how do we take on some of these threats, especially when it's things like critical infrastructure, and where are some strengths that we may have seen this done in the past that we may want to kind of dig back up? So let me start with you, Candice, and I'll hand it over to you, Rodney.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, Matt. And what a great topic. I watched the show on Netflix, Leave the World Behind, and I kept putting it on social media, telling everyone I could, like, this is what electronic warfare could look like. This is what happens when information operations is conducted, all of these different types of activities. And the best part is, all of the things are true. These things have actually happened, whether it's hacking into a vehicle, looking at precision navigation and timing. It just wasn't a really widely watched movie. And so then when people in the intelligence field and people that work in the cyber world watch it, they're like, I get it. Now I understand. I'm like, so let's make a blockbuster like that with the actual threats that we're facing right now, specifically China. Of course, the biggest problem we have with that is no one wants to be the Houston basketball team that then gets shut down because somebody said something against Hong Kong or years past against Tibet. And that part should also be very intimidating to us as American citizens and national security as well, to say something against another nation state or to even depict it should not be as fearful as it is right now. And I look forward to kind of exploring different ways we could encourage Hollywood to actually depict this and show it. Rodney, your thoughts?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I completely agree with you. And I think Hollywood is such a driver of our national dialogue on issues. And it reaches more people, as you said, Matt, than a government report or testimony on the Hill. So I think it's essential, really, if we want to create this culture of counterintelligence or culture of information security, then we have to actually be part of the popular culture, right? 330 million Americans. Let's go. How do we hit each and every one of them, and how do we persuade them that this is the way to do it, and how do we show them? So one of the things I guess we could think about is we need to reach the audience where it's at, right? And so going beyond Hollywood, it means, and with all the TikTok discussion, it means reaching influencers. So let me give an example. I was part of a panel discussion at Spicegate up in New York last year. And as part of that, they asked me to be interviewed by Maria Comstock, who's a Instagram, TikTok person with like 1 million followers, right? No one from the intelligence community. She just graduated from Berkeley, so she's hitting that young audience. Well, the other day I was at my daughter's volleyball practice, and one of the other moms came to me and said that, "You were in the CIA? I saw you on TikTok talking about all these things," right? And so it's like, this person would never have known who I was unless I was part of this national phenomenon. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, we need to have content across platforms. So it's not just blockbuster movies, but it means like everyday shows, whether it's a soap opera, a TV show about intelligence, or Friends. Something in there should address the issue of information assurance and cybersecurity. And finally, we got to do this in an authentic way. There's no better, more skeptical audience than an American audience at things, whether or not something's right or not. Well, obviously that's arguable given today's political environment. But I've seen so many things get knocked out of the popular discussion, pop culture discussion, because that's just not real. That's just not. No one would ever do that. And so we need to make sure that whatever we do is something that is believable by the people that we want to reach.
Yeah, it's a real problem that we didn't have cell phones in the age of Friends and Seinfeld, because we could have really worked those topics in and could have had a lot of fun with them. So the challenge that we have on ours is that multi-domain. There are some people that don't even need. They live off mobile. They're not glued to a television set, if you will, anymore. And even the traditional laptop users, like there's folks that can't live without their phone, but they can leave that laptop at home. And so how do you get those eyeballs to kind of focus in a Netflix only kind of environment from a streaming content? So one of the successes we had seen is, when there is an adversary that has kind of a happy ending story at the end, you have to pull it together. So what I have seen as challenges is that a lot of the information warfare doesn't end well. It ends with healthcare being shut down for 6 weeks at a time, and the happy ending is eventually they turn it back on, hopefully. It's really a challenge to put that happy ending or that hero story on top of it. Have either of you seen where there is kind of the ability to spin the successes of doing the right things and those types of engagements in the content we're seeing today?
Rodney, I'd like to point out the poster behind you with Argo. Is that right? I think that those kind of films that can talk about in the classified realm something that happened 50 plus years ago. Well, 50 plus years ago, we're getting closer and closer to the age of computers. So maybe, highlighting the first hackers and the impact that had. You could talk about those things that the intelligence community and the FBI did. The other part is, you're totally right, Matt. We have to meet people where they're at. I know when television first came out, print journalists were just up in arms that, oh my gosh, how do we get these different audiences and how do we pull them in? So taking a lesson from the past, how do you diversify? And you diversify to what audiences are. People in media that are selling things know this very well in marketing. And so we have to think of ourselves, the United States is an actual brand. We have something, we have this democracy thing that's really awesome. How do we sell national security? We don't do it necessarily by beating people over the head all the time, although that is a popular method that's used quite a bit, but also encouraging people to join this. Patriotism works with a particular segment of the audience, but then so do other things like freedoms and the ability to maintain our Constitution. That's another area. So starting to meet people where they're at, telling stories, and there are plenty of happy endings. I mean, we can look at the work that's been done by Cyber Command, by the CIA, FBI, there are enough stories that you could weave together in a way that wouldn't reveal sources and methods, that would tell some really epic stories of the things that we do with reaching out to audiences of people that don't live in the national capital region. It's plausible.
Yeah, one thing that's really hard I found in my part-time foray into Hollywood is getting stuff made. State of Affairs was our very first idea, and it came out, and I thought, how easy can this? It's not that hard. And it turns out, 10 years, it's very hard because everyone's looking for something different, or the story's not interesting, or whatever reason, right? So I think that probably the best way to do this, or one good way of doing this, is not trying to make a show or a big project, but actually send out teams of briefers to Hollywood and other places where they do writing and offer free seminars on these kinds of things, right? What does it look like? I'm being asked all the time, I'm sure some of my former CIA colleagues are being asked all the time about, can you talk to this screenwriter to try to make this a little more authentic than it already is? And sometimes they take the advice, sometimes they don't. They do more if you're an executive producer than they do if you're just a consultant. But I think that having the pushing our people out there and talking in a room with writers, and so that the next time, no matter what project these writers are working on today or in the future, this will be something in the back of their minds that they might want to incorporate into what they're doing.
I think that's a great idea. I think you'll have a lot of people raise their hand given that opportunity. I think that one of the things that we saw is some of these movies and content were a little ahead of their time. Like there was even a Die Hard movie about critical infrastructure being hacked and taken down, and it's a 2007 movie, and so people aren't watching that movie anymore. But there's pretty good coverage there. There's also a certain Will Smith movie about being monitored that was ahead of its time. We see some of the consultants that operated in that space that are still in Hollywood today, and they're doing great work. But it's always like the doctor watching a medical show, and they do something completely awkward, and you're like, I can't watch that anymore. So it's trying to get that authenticity in there in a story that's very compelling, and having had success with the show you did, Rodney, is there an open to consultancy in certain areas? Like, are they looking for, as you mentioned, kind of a free sit down education on things around, data as bulk data being used against us, or that info intelligence aspect of things?
Yeah, I think so, especially if the briefers are skilled enough to turn into kind of a story, and that'll be something that the writers can really relate to. Writers are naturally curious, and if this is something that the government will provide free, well, they'll go in and they'll take us up on it. So I think there is definitely room. There's definitely an opportunity here. It's something that I would love to help out with, but I think that would actually be really effective as a way to get through. You mentioned Live Free or Die Hard, which was a great movie about hackers and critical infrastructure, and that reminded me that one thing we should think about is a friend of mine, Shannon Van Zandt, once said that, well, our information is critical infrastructure now, and that should be considered as part of that. How do we protect our cyber systems as part of this critical infrastructure? And so that's something that came to my mind as well.
All right, and so Candice, any thoughts there?
No, I did want to kind of talk to Rodney though about the impact and influence, and I think that's something that being in DC versus people that are at the state of not a state of affairs, but state of play out in California that do a tremendous amount. That the influence of China itself in the domain, and how can we best get around that so people aren't afraid to say something to really negate their entire career. I mean, they don't want to throw it away because they posted something against China. And how do we work to combat that?
Well, China has a big influence on our industry because the industry wants to sell tickets to movies in China, right? But I think that Beijing, especially under Xi Jinping, has been very careful about doling out those privileges to American movie and television studios, and that's the main reason why it's very hard to get something cleared by the suits, up in Paramount or Netflix or wherever, that has anything to do with China being a potential adversary. For example, we had actually a script done for a feature, but actually for a pilot television show about intelligence services and their liaison work to work together. And we had an inciting incident that forced the Indians, the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, and the British to all come together and tackle a common enemy. And I wanted this film to show that, look, if the Chinese do things one way, and if we do some things act towards the Chinese in another way, we can actually do great things for the world together, right? So when we talked to Jackie Chan about partnering with us as an executive producer, he read the script and said that, no, this will never work. I'm like, why? We have Chinese heroes in here. It's like, no, because your inciting incident shows a vulnerability in China that we just cannot, that they cannot abide by. So these are all the issues that you've got. Plus, North Korea, right? You want to do a North Korea story? The Sony hack, I guess it's kind of almost meta. The Sony hack really put a kibosh on a lot of North Korea things. Although we've recently figured out a way to get around that, which is primarily don't say Kim Jong-un, and then you'll probably be okay. But that's slow to change. But China, I think that until we can get around the idea that Americans are going to make a lot of money in film and television in China, because it's proven that we can with, for example, Top Gun Maverick. It wasn't shown in China, but it still made over $1 billion, right? Then I think that's when we can start moving into more realistic, more authentic, and more compelling stories on the screen.
Well, and I don't think we have to limit it to that. I mean, there's a whole generation that thinks Spies Like Us is really how the IC works. And so, there's some GLG-20 humor that could be spread around if they do with the appetite for remakes. Maybe a remake of Spies Like Us could touch on a lot of this.
But Lord, help us.
So when we start talking about the challenges with a nation state adversary not wanting us to invest in kind of a public appeal campaign that shows them in a negative light, there's usually the turn to using another scapegoat as the adversary, and then just using a metaphor to tie it at the end. Have you seen any of that in use, to where you kind of sidestep and just kind of create kind of a faux China in this type of environment? I think it was easier in the days of the referenced shows like 24 and others, because when you had counterterrorism, it was a disparate groups all over the place, and you weren't pointing to anybody the State Department had to answer a phone with. So are you seeing something like that, Rodney?
There are a couple ways to do that. One is just like in the film Mile 22, pushed out by STX, Mark Wahlberg, Lauren Cohen. They just basically made up all the countries. It could have been Far-Offistan or whatever stan. They just made up the name of a country and they did it that way. Another case, Black Hat, which was a Chris Hemsworth film directed by Michael Mann. We helped a little bit on that. This was one of those films where the Chinese were actually cooperating with the Americans, and the adversary in this case was that third party criminal element, or sort of this underground information, like Mr. Robot, right? Underground information terrorist society that is threatening nation states as well as individuals. So those are a couple of ways of doing it. I think there's probably more appetite now to put Russia, to just name Russia, but I think that's probably about it at the moment.
Candice, any thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually thinking about that. It's not too hard now to revitalize maybe some of those 1980s movies, to do the revamp, to look at Russia again. But it would be very insightful to really talk to, if we go back, harkening back to our cyber topic, to go back to the impacts of some of the real danger that Russia has implanted in our not only critical infrastructure, but just the personal stories that they've had, targeting young kids. I think this is an area that we've had FBI alerts come out that have spoken to the fact that not only are now they're targeting, in the past they had targeted young girls, but now young boys, and we're seeing that median age. Not all of it comes from actors that we think, and to talk to, hey, how they're targeting your children, keeping your family safe, things like that. There are plenty of superhero moms out there that wouldn't it be great to show someone in the cyber field that's really not only protecting her country, but also her family writ large in this space. And I think that's something that people would understand, and then we can tagline, add on that multi-factor authentication. Go in there and do these things that you don't think are that important. When it says update now, you really should update. Those kind of things. I know it's kind of, for our field, we get it all the time. It's just ad nauseum. We understand Patch Tuesday, but for the majority of Americans, they just don't think about this because it's not front of mind for them. So it would be great to bring Russia and some of those horrific actors that are out there trying to steal our parents, money down in Florida, to stop them would be great, Rodney. There you go. We can work on a script.
And the lessons learned that we're getting right now out of Ukraine with critical infrastructure and hacking and a lot of the cyber acting there, we can probably tie that in. I mean, I think you've got a narrative there. So Rodney, any feedback on something that might go in that direction?
I'm sorry, in terms of Russia, Ukraine?
Yes.
Boy, that's a good question. Yeah, I think there is a narrative. There's lots of ways to sort of bring that story home. But I think it should start with, maybe this is getting off topic, but I think it should start with the Ukrainians, not the Americans. And so there's a story I heard about Ukrainian, their cyber experts are really good, but just some Ukrainian coders who are working for an American company because they were cheaper, and then the war started. So what happens after that? Right? What happens after that? And how do the Americans support their friends who are in Ukraine who are fighting? How do these Ukrainian coders now pivot from doing something commercial into something having to do with the war? And obviously the Russians, as we saw in Georgia and other places, they use cyber attacks as part of a warfare domain. And so you can still tie in the whole hacking aspect to that. So that's probably one way of doing it. I'm sure there are a million ways to skin this cat. So,
Candice, just furthering the kind of way we're looking, I always joke that we didn't even need truly a movie. We just needed a very popular trailer because people didn't actually have to watch the whole movie. They just need to see the scary part and a little bit of sunshine in a 2-minute segment. Have you had any thoughts about, how that type of content, which is almost social media friendly, how that can be leveraged?
I mean, wouldn't it be great to look at the fact of even pre-Russia, the declassification of some of the intel that came out of the White House and what Russia was trying to use as their narrative to kick the war off and how the administration spoke to that? I mean, it would be fascinating to see from obviously a made-up version of the Russian perspective of what they were trying to plant. It would be very interesting to start to see the downflow of that, and the fact that how our country goes in and tries to assist and aim and help other nations as they're being targeted by these huge nation state actors. I think that's a very creative way to show the work that we do, whether it's at Homeland Security or in the Defense Department. We'd love to be able to kind of sell that message to a larger audience and kind of get their patriotic verve back up again would be fantastic. Not just what we see on Fox News or CNN every morning, not to downplay those, but just the fact of there are still people doing great things and there's no deep state involved.
No, that's absolutely right. And Matt, I really love the idea of the movie trailer. In fact, it's sort of sparked an idea. When you go to an AMC theater right now, you're watching the previews before the main event. They always have an ad for themselves starring Nicole Kidman, which is funny. It's interesting. She's great. So if we created movie trailers, attach a big star to it so people will watch it, but compelling with a little bit of a story, that might work. And then you can repurpose that to YouTube, to Instagram, to TikTok, to wherever, and we'll reach the audiences where they're at with entertaining, educational, maybe inspirational content.
Yeah, I think we can only hold attention for 2 minutes till we get them hooked. You're not going to get them to go to the whole movie without it. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Well, I think the other thing you'd want is after they see the trailer, they say that, well, they should make a movie about this. This would be great, and then you start the momentum going.
Yes. So what kind of timelines do you see on these kind of things? Because we always hear that the thing in Hollywood and in other locations is that there's executive producers looking through just a lot of scripts, a lot of thoughts, a lot of pitch decks almost weekly. And how long does it take for those types of writing to get into the pipeline of what the public sees? Like, so are we looking to help educate writers today for a project that may come out in a year, or does it move a lot faster than that?
It really varies. So feature films can take years to get out there. So the script that we have, for example, that's sitting dormant about Russia, Ukraine, we've had it for 6 years. It was actually, we wrote it before the war started. So now it's relevant. So now I'm trying to claw it back from the producer who actually paid for it so that we can start pitching it again instead of having him hold it. But television shows, developing State of Affairs took us about a year. We had the idea at one moment, and then we got to Katherine Heigl and Alfred Woodard the next moment, and then we had to pitch it. And anyway, so that was another thing. But I think that if you went in with briefers and talked to writers, particularly television writers who have to come up with content every week, that's going to be a lot faster. I wouldn't limit the audiences to those types of writers, but they might put something in, next week, as early as next week, if it's possible. So.
All right, and are there just because you're a resident expert for the moment on this, when you started talking about the influencers, are there certain annual conferences or places that folks like ourselves should start to make our way towards, or are there, like, what are the gatekeepers and where are the open doors in these types of conversations?
I'm stumped because I'm 53 years old, so I'm not sure exactly where to go for these places. Certainly the CIA has been doing a good job of going out to the Comic-Cons that are in the area, and so there's always going to be people who are curious there, including influencers who want to do more, about that phenomenon. But no, I don't know. Candice, do you know of any places to go?
Well, I'm not really rubbing elbows with the Hollywood elite. I'm more with the people on Capitol Hill that I talk to. But I do find the fact of getting influencers that understand the fact that our information environment is heavily swayed sometimes by disinformation and misinformation. That would be great to kind of have that as a starting point. And it is. I got to give it to the National Park Service. Their X, or what used to be Twitter, account is hilarious. Like, they actually have someone behind it that's humorous. So things like that are just, daily snapshots in time. CISA has done a really great job at trying to do a lot of public outreach to bring these things to the forefront. And it would be great to see smaller efforts in the way, not to have to go all the way up to the Department of State to have some kind of external messaging. That would be really helpful.
All right. Well, we're closing out on this session, so let me just give you guys a few minutes to kind of give your thoughts on great next steps. But we've heard some great ideas about how we can start to introduce these concepts, and I think everything from traditional resiliency to working with the critical infrastructure sectors to try and get, I think if we talk to kind of the CISA stakeholder pool, they would say, please don't say electric grid every time, like there has to be something else. Make it the water, make it the transportation services, please.
I don't know, maybe the healthcare system and the billing aspect that just happened that we're really living through would be a great place to start. And somebody just wrote in the comments that, if we look at something that was so unknown in war games with Matthew Broderick way back in the 80s, where those things that we could look at now with AI, and it doesn't have to be the Terminator. That would be something to really explore the fact, and we as people that are in the tech field really grapple with it. I think for the most part, if we're looking out, sci-fi writers are awesome when they can kind of peer into the future and see those psychological, philosophical issues that we're all going to deal with in the future.
And just to highlight that the writer that did the movie War Games is still a futurist that consults with Fortune 100 companies today, because they want to pick his brain, like, okay, what's next, because it was so ahead of its time. Go ahead, Rodney.
No, I guess just to sort of summarize what I've been talking about, it's mostly about the experts maybe in government, but the professionals who actually do the stuff that influence the American public and the global public, they're off in Hollywood and other places, right? So we should find some way of putting them together and not have the government people try to pretend or become these sorts of influencers. Let me just give you one example. When I was overseas right before the Iraq War, we were given orders to look at covert influence to get support behind the Iraq War in 2003, and they gave us some materials. And I looked at this and said, No one's ever going to believe this. No. So that's sort of what informed me on this, is like, let's go to the people who actually know what they're doing. What might even be an ad agency, right? Or talent agency, because the agents know what's out there. So and then combine our efforts and make something that has impact.
All right. Well, both of you, Candice and Rodney, thank you so much for this great conversation today. We'll try and keep this train rolling and get some movement here and try and bring you both in.
Thanks.